Hi everyone, my name is David Ogilvy, and this is the podcast where I explore what it means to live, feel, and work better. This week, my business partner, Jon Watkins, joins me to discuss life transitions and his experience moving from being a Special Forces operative to the civilian world, the lows, the frustrations, and the advice he shared with a professional sports team about dealing with life transitions. I hope you enjoy it. So we're off, John. Welcome to the very first podcast. It's our very first podcast. So my name is David Ogilvy from the Resilience Development Company, and it seems a little bit weird kind of saying hello to you, John, seeing as though you're John from the Resilience Development Company and I see you every day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I wonder if we have we ever recorded ourselves doing this before?
No,
we must have. We must have recorded a Zoom. No, you don't.
Oh, probably. But we've said many times we should capture our conversations. So this is the start of it, isn't it? For the ResDev, as we are known to our friends, ResDev teams.
Yeah. I notice it's only after we've had the conversation that we say, "Oh, we should have recorded that. It was really good."
Yeah.
We never say it before, do we? So hopefully, I haven't cursed ourselves with this one.
No, so it's a first, right? But we define resilience as the ability to positively adapt to change. So we just have to positively adapt as we go. And if there are any bloopers, then that will just make it even more funnier and awkward than it feels.
Yeah, just being human.
Yeah, right. So I think what we thought we'd do is we'd chat around your blog. You recently wrote a blog after visiting a professional rugby team. And the blog was about chatting to the team about your experiences in terms of transition and your journey and offering advice. And it was pretty specific because of your background. So I suppose it's probably worth defining what a transition is, right? So from your perspective, how would you define a transition versus change?
Yeah, so typically when people go through a change, that's all we focus on, isn't it? Just focus on the change. A moment in time where something changes within your environment. That's generally how you can see change. It's sudden, it's immediate. There's a definitive time frame you can attach to it. Most people will recognise that. What they don't recognise is the transition that happens after the change. So the change, that immediate date, but the transition is how you adapt to the change psychologically. So mentally, emotionally, and socially, how do you adapt to the change? And that's the challenge that people from my previous profession, the military, elite sports people, new parents, people in retirement, that's the challenge they face when they go through those big life changes. How do I adapt mentally, emotionally, and socially to this new environment?
So transition,
and that's what the blog was about.
Yeah, got you. Transition's internal, change is kind of external. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
I've got you. So why would anybody from a professional sports team listen to you about transition? Tell us about your background. I obviously know your background, so I understand why they'd listen to you. But for people who are joining us and listening to this, they're probably thinking, what does he know about transition, and what is it about his background that got him in front of a professional rugby team? So just tell us a little bit about your background, John.
So like everyone, I've gone through lots of change in my life, lots of big transitions. But the ones that particularly interested the Jersey Reds were my military background. So I left university. That's a big transition into the military. I then made the transition from the Royal Marines to Special Forces, and then I made the really big transition out of Special Forces back into the civilian world. And that's what they were particularly interested in, making that big step from a high performing background back into the civilian world. But it wasn't the only transition I went through. I actually went through almost a double transition because I went through a life-changing illness at the same time. So I had two things to adapt to: a new way I had to live, and a new way. New ways I suppose I had to live. The double transition. That's what they were particularly interested in. And as we've already mentioned, our job now deals with transition. So there were three aspects to it that they were particularly interested in hearing from me. But in particular, as I said, it's the one about the military. Giving them some advice, and that's what their focus was. So you were how do we successfully survive?
Yeah, so
and thrive.
Royal Marine first, then from the Royal Marine into the Special Forces. Posted all over the world.
Yes. Typical military career, bouncing all over the place. Yeah, that was it. Very enjoyable, but very different to to a normal life, I suppose. That's the key, isn't it? Very, very different.
Because you're quite open in your blog about health issues, aren't you?
Yes, yeah.
So it wasn't the transition you were expecting?
No, that happened pretty suddenly, and again, like anyone that's medically discharged, you have to kind of deal with that, and you're just sort of getting to grips with that, and suddenly you find yourself in the outside world having to deal with that. But yes, my life changed completely. Not overnight, it happened slowly, but the diagnosis was instant, and then it's adapting to that and constantly having to adapt from the sort of 93 kilogram Olympic athlete to, well, I couldn't even walk up the stairs towards the end. Before I got the diagnosis. So that's a pretty big change, isn't it? Massive change of mindset from go out and do 5 days worth of phys, running 8-12 miles every time you go out and do it, to walking the dog twice a day is about all my energy will allow me to do. So yeah, that's a big change.
Yeah, because you described yourself as a 93 kilogram mountain goat, didn't you?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Why a mountain goat? Is that because that's where you were in the mountains, or?
Yeah, I could just run up mountains for fun. That was it. That was how fit I was. Give me a mountain, give me a lot of them. I could run up them for fun. Didn't even have to think about it. Off I'd go. Whereas now, you stop about 5 times on the way up the stairs. That's fitness. Yeah, that is fitness. But realistically, I couldn't get back to that stage anymore because my health wouldn't allow it. The minute I pushed the boundaries too much, then I recognised I relapsed. So I have to be very mindful now of, learned that over 5 years of really managing my energy. So yes, and that's a transition that's still ongoing. When you look at yourself in the mirror and you're piling on the pounds, you go, I can't go. I can do something about it. Of course you can, but I can't dedicate the time and energy that I used to be able to that.
Yeah, because that is a good example of the difference between change and transition, isn't it? You got that event, you leave the military, an elite performance unit, but you still say going through that transition, that internal kind of journey mentally and emotionally. And I know that, I work with you every day. We're all doing that, but that's a great example. So you left the military, and then what?
I ended up I ended up a bit stagnant for 2-3 months, looking for a career. So I left the military slowly over 12 months because I was recovering from the illness. So I wasn't really in active service. I was just recovering in and out of hospital. That took 12 months, and then sort of the end date arrived in May, and then it was about 3 months before I found a job. I did what everyone else does: try and find a job, try and find my place. I'd moved back to Jersey. I was starting a new life there, really. I say back to Jersey. It wasn't. I was starting a new life in Jersey as well at the same time. But my family and friends were there, and we'll cover that at some point, I'm sure, in the next few minutes. And then I ended up in a career that I thought kind of suited me. It ticked a few of the boxes. Interestingly, I was told not to do it by everyone who knew me. And I started there in September, and I didn't last very long. I wish I'd gone earlier, but I didn't last very long. I think I lasted maybe about 4 months, and then my illness crept in again. And as I said in the blog, luckily I fell physically ill, because I think not far behind was mental illness. And then so and then I left that. That was the nudge I needed to leave that career, and I ended up bumping into some Northern guy and coming on board. Actually, it wasn't. We met a year earlier, didn't we? Went through the program about a year earlier. But yes, then came on full time at ResDev. So
yeah, because you do. Yeah. You don't talk about meeting me and coming on to ResDev in the blog, but you do talk about that kind of where you found yourself at work. And particularly what I found interesting was not only where you found yourself, but this perception, because I have this perception, like many people. Look, you've had millions of pounds spent on your training. You're an elite performer. You're a special forces soldier. You're supposed to be able to get dropped in anywhere, aren't you? And just be able to deal with it, surely.
Yeah.
But you're very open in your blog about that, and there's a specific insight that I'm hoping I can draw out of you.
Yeah, I know. I'm assuming I know the one you mean. I liken it to a polar bear, and I'm assuming that's the one that you're thinking about. it's just a simile that hopefully people relate to. But let's assume we pick up a polar bear, we take it away from the Arctic. It's a cold, barren wasteland, and we place it in the Gobi Desert, another cold, barren wasteland. Would we expect that polar bear to survive? No, not really. It wouldn't last very long at all, because the challenge ultimately that many people face when they make that transition, especially from their primary career into a secondary one, is that change in environment and having to completely adapt to that new environment. And yes, I was trained to adapt very, very quickly in lots of different circumstances. And the selection process I went on was deliberately designed to test that. You were expected to be picked up and thrown into parts of the world that was, well, exceptionally challenging. 30, 40 degree heat, 100% humidity, and then operate to an exceptionally high level. And selection tested that. And those people whose body couldn't stand that, even if they were technically good enough, they didn't make it through. So yes, in some respects, you're expected to adapt instantly. But the way I explain it in the blog is you're adapting within the environment that you know. That's the key. You're within an environment you're trained in, you've been through training, it's got you prepared for it. But what the training doesn't prepare you for is a completely different environment full of different habits, beliefs and behaviors. And that's what you find yourself in often when you make these big transitions. You go into an environment that you're not used to. And that's the challenge in adapting to that. And as I explained in the blog, it's actually when you think of someone, you talk about a resilient person. If we went through it now, if we went through traits of resilient people, and if I asked the listeners, what would you expect from someone who's resilient, able to adapt to change and then thrive through it? They'd list things like optimistic, positive, focus on what you can control. And those are all absolutely right. And I was trained to do that. But if you ask me how I did it, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. My answer would be, well, I just did it. And those were all tested and tried within a controlled environment. That's training. Train hard, fight easy. But as soon as you find yourself thrown into this completely new environment with a new set of habits, beliefs and behaviors, you can't do that. You need to know exactly what you need to do. You need to know the skill. You be able to name it, list it, explain it, do it. And I was never trained to do that. I was just tested to make sure I could do it without actually knowing it. So that was the interesting journey. So yeah, thrown out. And as we've already spoken about, it was the transition that did me. The first week was fine. The first 2 weeks, the first 3 weeks was fine. Mm-hmm. It was over time that you started to notice it. And actually, and anybody that's been through a transition, even let's say parenting, which majority of people have been through, and I'm talking in particular to dads here, mums, might be a little bit easier because they've carried the child for 9 months, but a dad suddenly presented with this child. It's 8 months later that you finally realise that you've adapted to having that baby and then you're a dad. And it's no different to what I experienced. It wasn't the first 3 weeks. It was 6 months later that I realised I was struggling. People have been telling me for weeks and months that it wasn't me, I was unhappy, I was exceptionally stressed, but that built up very, very slowly. So I wasn't able to pinpoint it. And it's that transition.
Yeah.
It's not the first month, it's 6-8 months down the line. And I'm sure you experienced it when you became a dad for the first time.
Nothing prepares you for being a dad, not even special forces training.
No, that wouldn't. No,
nothing prepares you for being a dad, does it?
It's that 9 months later, isn't it? That's what it is.
Yeah.
Those first few months, you're just caught in the headwinds, but you suddenly, when everything slows down and you just recognise where you're at, it's 8 months before you're comfortable in that new environment.
Yeah.
And that's the experience I've had. Talking to a lot of people, my peers at the moment, that's certainly where it's at with dads. I'm talking dads here.
Yeah, I'm being just any transition and change, and just being able to process it mentally and emotionally. Because I remember when you first came on the program, you said, "What can you teach me about resilience?" And my response was, "I don't know, but I think there were things that you took away." Right, we can talk about
100%,
that.
yeah.
There were definitely things that you took away, and it's always interesting when we meet people and we talk to people how we differentiate mental toughness and resilience. Because it's kind of, I'm not saying that's purely what it is, but there's a lot of that in where you're coming from in your background, wasn't it? That mental toughness, which can work for you like any strength, but overplayed, it can start to work against you. And that's when you need those other skills to really kind of understand who you are and process who you are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you've heard me say it a million times before. Looking back now, I'd describe myself as mentally and physically tough, or mentally and physically robust with resilient traits. But I couldn't name the skills. So if you can't name the skills, you can't use them. Are you 100% resilient? I had resilient traits, of course I did. But that biggest test where you have to adapt to a new environment, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly challenging. Incredibly challenging test that. Whip you out of the military and put you into something completely alien. I didn't have those skills to enable me to thrive. And it comes at a cost, as you said. It might not come at a cost to you. That's the thing that some people don't recognize. It might come at a cost to the people around you, your relationships. And that's certainly what began to happen to me. I got stressed. I got incredibly stressed. But I was okay with that, I suppose. It came at a cost to my relationship with Charlie, girlfriend at the time, and certainly my peers that I was supposed to be working with. So I couldn't work with them, was the ultimate answer. I just could not work with those people.
Yeah. To finding that transition tough. And really, I suppose, nobody to work it through. If you've not got the skills and the language and the shared language, you have to kind of almost put up and shut up.
That's exactly what it is, isn't it? Which is very military. And I speak about it in the blog, isn't it? You just get on with it. You fight through. You just force yourself to keep going because you've been through tough times, and the way you've dealt with them is generally with physical and mental toughness or robustness. But when you're dealing with emotions, you can't just fight through, can you? Because they catch you at some point. And as I said, luckily it was my physical health that dropped, because I'm sure it would have been mental.
Yeah.
Probably a month, 2 months later. I can't put a date on it, but it was getting that way.
That's that emotional labour, isn't it? We all have to.
That's what you're talking about.
All have to do things, right? We all have to do things and say things that go right against what we truly believe our values, and that's that emotional labour. And you're quite right. All the research says if you continue to do that, and we all do it some days, we have to do it. It's part of being human and working and living with people. Is if you carry on, all the research says it leads to depression. So there is definitely that health link, definitely. And and again, working with you like I do, I know you're always passionate about skills and training, and you're always drawing a differentiation between coaching and training, and almost saying you can't achieve an outcome if you don't have the skills, if you haven't been trained. So, for example, no amount of coaching will help. So when you were working with the professional rugby team, was it coaching, was it training, or it sounded like it was a kind of, these are my experiences, this is what I've learned, but more than that as well?
Yeah, there are a few things I shared, but it was more, these are my experiences. Yeah, absolutely. And see where you go with it, almost. So, yeah, we speak a lot, don't we? Getting out in front of people and talking for an hour is useful. Can start them on the journey, but we all need that training. I think one of my favourite quotes is we're all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to the same human deficiencies that cause a drop off in all of us. So no matter where we go, at some point, being human will catch up with us at some point. So you need the skills to be able to manage those situations. So ultimately, I would recommend that everyone goes out and gets these skills, gets some training, gets some coaching to support them. But in this case, it wasn't that. It was an hour. I shared some things with them, and then left it with them, really, from my experience.
Just reading through the blog, there were two big themes that you shared with them.
Yeah.
One of them was look backwards, not forwards. That was the first one. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, based on my experience and talking to some of the people that I've worked with in the past, we have a habit of going, okay, this is where I'd like to be in 10 years' time, and you build from where you are now to that point. So you start to take one step at a time, which we're very good at in the military and elite sport. Set yourself a goal and you start to move towards it. But what I found is that it narrowed my focus. So I just became obsessed with a job, really, getting a job that I thought kind of suited me, and just pushing towards that. I kind of knew myself reasonably well. I knew what made myself tick, and I headed off on the consultancy route. And I started to go down the usual route that everyone in my unit started to go to, which was you head to London first. Then you try and build up the relationships and networking in that environment. But ultimately got it very wrong. And in some respects, luckily, I did fall ill and ended up back in Jersey in hospital there. And I could start that transition all over again. Because I probably would have got it very wrong heading in London, because like the polar bear, it was a totally alien environment to me. You're going to find it. It's a transition. You're going to be in a new environment, but why make it tougher for yourself? And I ended up in London, in a big city full of big crowds, on that hamster wheel, in a world that was all about technical skills, really, which is not necessarily what you're going to offer when you leave the military. And what I wish I'd done, which is what I suggested to the team, was, start with thinking, right, here's my leave date. So you've got to plan ahead, depending on how long you've been in. It probably requires a bit longer preparation. But you go, here's my end date. Right, one day after that, what do I want my life to look like? Where do I want to be living? What's my family? Because that's the other thing you've got to consider in a big transition. The family are making it with you, whether you recognise that or not, especially in the military. Incredibly tough for the families to suddenly have you around 24/7, for example. What do I want my family to look like? What sort of job? What's my lifestyle? All those really important questions that you don't necessarily consider when you get caught up in that big whirlwind of, I need to find a job, which is essentially what you've got to do because you're looking for a new job. And I said, I made the mistake of looking outside of what we call our stability zones. People, places, ideas, things, group that bring you comfort and security. So act as a nullifying impact when you go through periods of stress and in particular change. And I looked in London, as I said, big city, big crowds, but my lifestyle was lived on the beach. I ran up hills, I ran up mountains. I was on my kayak in the summer. I didn't like large groups. I liked small, intimate settings. That was me. That was me as a person. I was not suited to London in any shape or form. And I would have made it incredibly difficult for myself by going into London. And actually, I think, I don't have the data on this, but when I left, there were sort of 5 or 6 people that left with me, and everyone headed to the city. And I think even a year later, there was only one left. I know for a fact there's only one left now. It just didn't suit us. You just think, what a waste of a year, how much extra stress that's caused and pressure that's put on probably the people around you as much as yourself. So I ended up in Jersey, as I said, by fault, not by design, but it worked for me because I was in an area that was small, it was personal, it meant I could get to know people. I didn't have to rely on technical skills that I didn't have to get a job and to climb the ladder. I was by the beach, I was by some cliffs, but hills, open land. I could do everything that was me. And I think that was really important. So, my advice to the team was, don't just get caught in that hamster wheel running towards a target. Stop and think, what do you want that world to look like? Because you have more control than you think. And that was a big message, really. That was the first message anyway.
Yeah, working more towards your own sense of self, because it links kind of to the second point, which was
absolutely, yeah.
And it's one line. I love the line. Know yourself. Just pause. Really know yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a habit, don't we? I was lucky. I did know myself, possibly better than some. I don't know why, but I knew what made me tick. I knew the difference between being a Royal Marine and being in the SF, and why I thrived more there than I did as a Royal Marine, because it enabled me to come through the language we now know as character strengths. But back then it was just me, what I'm good at. Enabled me to come through. So that was really important. But yeah, we have a habit. I kind of know who I am. And I got that bit right. I kind of knew who I was. I knew what made me tick. Good judgment, good perspective, put a lot of energy to fault finding. Consultancy would be the natural progression. That's what I did at the unit. That's what I did particularly well. I looked at things we needed to improve and I went about and did them. Wrote some papers on how we should improve some key areas. So I thought, well, that's easily can move that across to the civvy world. But actually, if I delved a little bit deeper and got to know me a little bit more, I'd have realized that wasn't in process and procedure. It was people that suited me much more. And I think knowing some of the stuff I now would have been incredibly useful back then to really understand you. And we're talking specifically, aren't we, our values. We're talking our values, our character strengths, and therefore what drives us on a daily basis. And we're back to your emotional labor. because you get that right, you're not carrying emotional labor around with you. And that's the bit I ultimately got wrong. I said I knew myself, but I didn't know myself well enough to recognize that I was walking into an environment that would be so contrary to everything that I had been brought up to. And that's what the military training does, brings you up, creates you into this person. And that was teamwork, value, judgment, perspective. And I was put into a hamster wheel, which is ultimately going to completely drain my energy, which it did.
Yeah. So, as you're talking there, I'm thinking of something that we know in our programs, and we know because we're both professional coaches, is if you've got that clarity of thought, that clarity of thinking, it gives you that confidence to commit. And if you've got that emotional labor, or you can't quite work out where you are, then you don't have that clarity, which impacts your confidence, which means you can't commit. And kind of what I'm hearing as I play it back is that's what you got as a special forces soldier. You had that clarity, so you had the confidence to commit. And I was earlier on, as you were talking, I was looking around the screen because I was moving from one screen to another. There's a brilliant quote in the blog that I kind of think it sums up everything you've just said, and it's your quote, right? It's by you. To thrive, you'll have to learn to adapt to that new environment. More precisely, it is adapting your habits, beliefs, and behaviors, and that's the ultimate challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anyone that's read anything on a transition from sort of an elite performance world, you've got loads to offer. It's just like anyone that making that transition to that new environment, you've got loads and loads to offer. The challenge that we had, in particular in the military, is, well, I was a Royal Marine, so it was 9 months of basic training. And for the first 3 months, technical skills were imparted on you at a very simplistic level, because what they were really doing was they were transitioning you from a civilian into the military. That continued all the way through training, and then actually into the unit. It really was, it's two years plus in a unit before you're a proper Royal Marine, I suppose. But then when you leave, it's instant. It's just a change. There's no transition. It's just boom, you're out, go. And then you're expected to be able to make that transition back in terms of the way you think, feel, and behave towards that environment, i.e. your habits, beliefs, and behaviours. That's incredibly challenging if you're not shown how to do that.
Yeah.
We know that.
Because I think you've said this before. You've not said it like this, but let me ask you a question.
Yeah, okay.
How long in total did it take you to train to become a special forces operative? How long?
Oh wow! Well, it started at the beginning of Royal Marine training, I suppose. That's where you're starting it. Operational tours. I was lucky. I spent 2.5 years in the Marines. Some people spend 5, 6 before they go into that environment. And then it is a selection process, but it's not just that. You're also adapting to a new environment and being trained to operate in that new environment. So in total, probably 4 years at least in the military before I was badged. But you're never in until you've done a full rotation, which was 2 years.
Yep.
So, that's it. 6 years, really, at least.
So 6 years to become a soldier. And how long in terms of years training did you get from becoming from a military to civilian?
Oh, there's none, is there? They do the usual things there's the usual things we talk about. Here's how to write a CV. Here's how to do little bits and pieces. But it's the bit we've spoken about. It's not the change that's the problem. It's the transition. So how do you adapt to those new environments? And that's the challenge. Going back to the quote, we've got loads to offer, loads and loads of skills to offer. The challenge is you have to adapt to that new environment. It's different. It's that polar bear again. If he just took the same behaviours he had in the Arctic and tried to replicate them in the Gobi Desert, he'd be dead in weeks. He has the core strength that he needs, i.e. the big strength, the big nose, the big teeth, to survive in the Gobi Desert. But he needs to adapt the way he thinks, his habits, his thinking habits, and his behaviours in order to do that. And that's no different with the military. And that's where I struggled in that first job. It was just too big a leap, way too big a leap. For me, and I couldn't do that. And the end, you respond the only way your body knows how, which is, your brain knows how, which is, this is a massive threat to me. So here comes some stress.
So because you're very open on the blog, right? I know that you're very open, right? And I remember talking to you after you'd been to speak to the professional rugby team. And I'm assuming you were just as open with them, right? And almost not probably what they were expecting, because in many ways you are. Like if I'm in a room with you, it's obvious. If you said he's ex special force, it's obvious. You're really tall. You kind of got that kind of physicality to you. Physically, if I looked at you, I go, yeah, okay, I get that, right? But then suddenly you've got that, and you've got somebody talking and almost saying things perhaps that go against what people assume and know. How did it go down? How did that advice and that talk go down with them?
Well, very well, apparently, because they invited me back about 2 weeks later to talk about something different. So obviously particularly well. But I think the way I finished it, there is that common phrase, especially in the military, the grass is always greener, i.e. don't leave it because it's hell out there. You think it's a better place, but it's not. And that's not true. I left them with the grass is whatever colour you decide to make it. That's not entirely true, because it's, you need some luck, you need some training, some coaching to help you to ultimately thrive. But there's opportunity out there. So it wasn't a negative. There's lots of good things, and lots of people make very successful transitions without doing anything. I don't think I've come across anyone yet, and I mean that generally, who have not found it difficult. Haven't found it difficult. That first 12 months, I can remember the first 2 people I spoke to said, you won't last in your first job, and the first 12 months be hell. And then I met another ex-military person who said, I won't employ you. No chance, because I know you'll quit. I'll employ you if this is your second job, not if it's your first. Because that's it is. We come back to it. Loads to offer, but you need to be able to adapt your habits, your beliefs, and behaviours, and that's not what you're trained to do. No. You're trained to be a person, and it's the environment, and drop you off. But you don't have to change the way you think, feel, and behave when you move around that military environment, and that's the bit. How do you do that? Well, we know that's what we do now, isn't it? And coming back to know yourself, well, we know we do a module on it, character strengths, don't we? And the number of people that you ask and you speak to, especially on one-on-one, where you go, I kind of knew this. Yeah, that's the point. You kind of knew it, but you need to see it down on paper with a full sentence explanation of exactly what it is. And that's what I mean by don't just know yourself, really know yourself. Be able to articulate it really clearly. And I think that's one thing I put in my blog. You do, networking.
Absolutely, it was
articulate yourself, not your technical skills.
No, it was a great blog, very open and very kind of surprising. Not surprising because I know you and I've worked with you for how long now? Lots of years, right? But I think it will challenge some people's view of military, and that's what I love about it. It's kind of going, I've often heard you say, the difference between good and great is the really small things. It's the small things and executing them really, really well. And that skill, it means it's repeatable, right? And there are many skills emotionally and mentally, aren't they, that were just not taught at school that me and you now know and teach other people. And so I completely get what you're saying, because I was the same. My story is, this was my wife's company. I came out of the finance industry and I went on the program, and I was like, so many things have just connected in my head now. The things I do intuitively, I now know actually it's a skill, and I can make it in a skill, and I can share it with people. And that's what we love about doing what we do. Because kind of what we're talking about here really is resilience, isn't it? And there's another blog. It's probably another podcast, another chat about the 3 different types of resilience. Number one is that natural resilience. We're just kind of born with it. We all have strength. We all have different assets of resilience. And if you said to most people, well, you tell me, right? If I said to you in your military career, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much natural resilience do you have? What would you say, John?
Oh, it'd have been very high. Yeah, it would have been 8, 9.
Yeah, and then there's that second type of resilience. I call it kind of adaptive resilience. It's where you learn it the hard way.
Yeah.
Go through adversity, you're challenged, you're stretched, and you somehow manage to come through. You generally look back at it through a lens of strength, and you're able to kind of interpret it and make meaning from it. So you can bring that to other scenarios. And if I said to you again, right, in your military career, how much adaptive resilience do you reckon you had on a scale of 1 to 10? I suspect it would be high again.
It's the basis of all military training.
Right. And then
that's what you do inside. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say 3 times. That third type is restored resilience, skills based. So in other words, when your resilience is dipping, you got the skills to be able to kind of increase it, right? And that means you can either bounce back, and we won't even get started on that, or go from good to great. And then if I said to you, with hindsight now, looking back when you were in the military, how much of that restored resilience did you have? A skills base that you could switch on and use when you needed it. Where would you have rated yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 there?
Oh, it'd be much lower. You're talking 3, 4, aren't you?
Yeah.
The military, as we've spoken about, the military, most people, it's the first 2, isn't it? The military, what makes them stand out, and elite sport is the training. It's the second type of resilience.
Yeah. And they do it really well, because most people don't have that restored resilience. I didn't.
Exactly, yeah.
I relied on intuition. And even going back to where we talked about being dads as well, is both of my kids, who are older than your son, has been on the resilience program, and I'm so glad they have, because they have that shared skills. And I shudder to think where I would be, with teenagers. My kids are older now, but teenagers and beyond, if I'd not had those skills to rely on. And then you're kind of back to the old point of us existing, aren't you, as a company? We could wax on forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wax on forever.
People need to be trained in these skills.
Yeah.
Life's full of transition.
Yeah. It's a shame we're just not taught it at school. As simple as that.
Definitely. One day.
Yeah, exactly. So if anybody wants to find the blog, we'll put the links up. We'll make sure that wherever you're looking at this, or whether you're listening to it, because it is a video and a podcast, that you're able to get it. But there's plenty of blogs, isn't there, that we've all written at resiliencetraining.co.uk. Click into articles. And given that it was your blog, John, beautifully written, have you got any last point that you'd like to make before we finish up, which is our first ever podcast?
Question. I think read the blog. Just read it. See what you think. Engage with it. Let us know what you think. We could stand here and be wax lyrical about lots of different things. Go out, get training, get coaching. Just read the blog. See what you think, and then come talk to us. Yeah, get in touch. I'm happy to get in touch. You're on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Probably the one bit we haven't spoken about actually was the quit piece. That's always an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. Things aren't working for you, just quit. No, I'm joking, don't do that. No, just have a read of the blog, get in touch and see what you think. That is always an option though, isn't it? People assume resilience is just keep pushing. Absolutely, yeah. Your story, it was stop, recharge, look around, and I wish I'd quit. Yeah. I wish I'd quit way before I was forced to quit. Yeah. Absolutely. That is which is always an interesting approach, because it's not a natural thing, I would say. So I don't like doing it. There's so much in there. There's so much we've picked up on. Right, plenty more, and hopefully this is the start of lots of conversations between us as a team, because this will be the first time anybody's ever heard of us. There are 4 of us, so I plan to kind of get some really great conversations going between the 4 of us, but also get some guests in as well and get them talking about different things. So I don't think we've done a bad job for our first attempt, have we? Seems all right. Proof will be in the pudding. Proof will be in the pudding. We'll see, won't we? Yeah. We'll just see. We'll see what happens, but it's going to be our first. So it's another first for us. That's it. Adaptive resilience. Here we come. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to say thanks for joining me. But I know I'm going to see you later on. But exactly. Thanks for joining me. I'm sure we'll do some wonderful things with all of this stuff and edit it and do all sorts of things and get it out there for people. So if you're listening to it, you're probably listening to the edited version. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I hope you subscribe to the list that we'll set up. And this is the first of many. Thanks for listening to the Resilience Development Show. I hope you got some value from the episode. If you'd like to read Jon's full blog, head on over to resiliencetraining.co.uk/articles or click on the link in the description to go straight there. You can also get access to many other articles on resilience with lots of hints and tips that help us all live, work and feel better. All of these things can be found by paying us a visit. Thanks for listening and see you next week.